The first few days at the Mount Washington Observatory were a disorienting blend of mundane routine and profound, unnerving isolation. I recorded atmospheric pressure, wind speeds, precipitation levels, my actions precise, automatic, a scientist clinging to the familiar scaffolding of data in an increasingly alien world. The view from the observation deck, when the dense fog occasionally parted, was breathtaking. A jagged, snow-blasted panorama stretching to an infinite, steel-gray horizon. Beautiful, yes, but with a stark, predatory indifference that gnawed at the edges of my composure. My only human contact was Dr. Sarah Chen, the program director. Her voice a crackling, disembodied presence over the shortwave radio during our scheduled daily check-ins. She was professional, efficient. Her concern for Blackwood's disappearance carefully masked by scientific detachment. The search teams found nothing, Daniel. She'd reported on my third day, her voice tinny. No tracks, no sign. It's like he just evaporated. We're officially suspending the active search until a significant thaw. Stay safe up there. Stick to protocol. Protocol. And Blackwood's 3 cryptic rules. They felt more like warnings from a madman than seasoned advice. Then the wind truly began to speak. It wasn't the constant, impersonal roar I'd expected. During lulls and the fiercer gales, it would coil around the station, a sibilant, insinuating whisper that seemed to dance just at the edge of comprehension. Words, or something like them, ancient and guttural, would form and dissolve in the complex interplay of currents buffeting the structure. And woven within them, like a poisoned thread, were echoes of Laura, her laughter, fragmented phrases from old conversations, promises of reunion, of absolution. It wasn't your fault, Danny. I'm waiting for you. Just listen. Truly listen. The temptation to strain, to decipher, to cling to those phantom syllables of comfort was a physical ache, a desperate yearning that clawed at my sanity. Do not listen closely. Blackwood's first rule. I found myself pressing my hands over my ears, humming loudly, anything to drown out that seductive, tormenting chorus. I sought refuge in Blackwood's journals. The early volumes were what I expected. Meticulous meteorological observations, equipment logs, complaints about dwindling coffee supplies. But as the years progressed, the entries grew. Stranger, references to the mountain's voice, to sacred resonances, to the old ones stirring beneath the ice. He wrote of specific wind patterns that seemed to carry intelligible patterns, of a deep thrumming he could feel through the station floorboards on certain nights. One entry, dated a year before his disappearance, read, "The whispers demand an audience. They offer knowledge for a price." Laura understood. Why can't they see? Laura, my Laura, or another? The ambiguity was a fresh stab of dread. My unease deepened. One afternoon, while recalibrating a sensor array near Blackwood's old workstation, I noticed it. A section of the reinforced steel floor plating, directly beneath a south-facing window that overlooked a particularly precipitous ice-choked ravine, known as the Devil's Gullet, was scoured unnaturally clean, far cleaner than the surrounding area. Yet within the infinitesimal grooves of the metal, almost invisible to the naked eye unless the light hit it just so, were faint, dark stains. Stains that looked disturbingly, unmistakably like old dried blood. The first few days at the Mount Washington Observatory were a disorienting blend of mundane routine and profound, unnerving isolation. I recorded atmospheric pressure, wind speeds, precipitation levels, my actions precise, automatic, a scientist clinging to the familiar scaffolding of data in an increasingly alien world. The view from the observation deck, when the dense fog occasionally parted, was breathtaking. A jagged, snow-blasted panorama stretching to an infinite, steel-gray horizon. Beautiful, yes, but with a stark, predatory indifference that gnawed at the edges of my composure. My only human contact was Dr. Sarah Chen, the program director. Her voice a crackling, disembodied presence over the shortwave radio during our scheduled daily check-ins. She was professional, efficient. Her concern for Blackwood's disappearance carefully masked by scientific detachment. The search teams found nothing, Daniel. She'd reported on my third day, her voice tinny. No tracks, no sign. It's like he just evaporated. We're officially suspending the active search until a significant thaw. Stay safe up there. Stick to protocol. Protocol. And Blackwood's 3 cryptic rules. They felt more like warnings from a madman than seasoned advice. Then the wind truly began to speak. It wasn't the constant, impersonal roar I'd expected. During lulls and the fiercer gales, it would coil around the station, a sibilant, insinuating whisper that seemed to dance just at the edge of comprehension. Words, or something like them, ancient and guttural, would form and dissolve in the complex interplay of currents buffeting the structure. And woven within them, like a poisoned thread, were echoes of Laura, her laughter, fragmented phrases from old conversations, promises of reunion, of absolution. It wasn't your fault, Danny. I'm waiting for you. Just listen. Truly listen. The temptation to strain, to decipher, to cling to those phantom syllables of comfort was a physical ache, a desperate yearning that clawed at my sanity. Do not listen closely. Blackwood's first rule. I found myself pressing my hands over my ears, humming loudly, anything to drown out that seductive, tormenting chorus. I sought refuge in Blackwood's journals. The early volumes were what I expected. Meticulous meteorological observations, equipment logs, complaints about dwindling coffee supplies. But as the years progressed, the entries grew. Stranger, references to the mountain's voice, to sacred resonances, to the old ones stirring beneath the ice. He wrote of specific wind patterns that seemed to carry intelligible patterns, of a deep thrumming he could feel through the station floorboards on certain nights. One entry, dated a year before his disappearance, read, "The whispers demand an audience. They offer knowledge for a price." Laura understood. Why can't they see? Laura, my Laura, or another? The ambiguity was a fresh stab of dread. My unease deepened. One afternoon, while recalibrating a sensor array near Blackwood's old workstation, I noticed it. A section of the reinforced steel floor plating, directly beneath a south-facing window that overlooked a particularly precipitous, ice-choked ravine, known as the Devil's Gullet, was scoured unnaturally clean, far cleaner than the surrounding area. Yet within the infinitesimal grooves of the metal, almost invisible to the naked eye unless the light hit it just so, were faint, dark stains. Stains that looked disturbingly, unmistakably like old dried blood. A blizzard of epic proportions descended upon the summit without warning, a maelstrom of white fury that transformed the mountain into a shrieking, malevolent entity. The observatory became a tiny, besieged island in an ocean of roiling snow and ice. Visibility dropped to zero. The wind, no longer whispering, now screamed a continuous, deafening note that vibrated through the very structure of the station, through my bones, through my teeth. The radio link to Dr. Chen became a cacophony of static, her voice fading in and out, a fragile thread to a world that now seemed impossibly distant. "Daniel, can you... storm? Severe? Hold." Then nothing but the hiss of dead air. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The feeling of being trapped, of being at the mountain's mercy, was suffocating. Days blurred into a disorienting cycle of checking instruments that were rapidly failing, rationing supplies, and battling the growing sense of dread that the storm was not merely a weather event, but something orchestrated. It was during a rare, deceptive lull in the blizzard, when the wind momentarily dropped to an eerie preternatural calm, that the second rule clawed its way into my reality. The silence was almost more unnerving than the preceding tempest, and in that dead, frozen quiet, the anemometer outside on its mast began to spin. Not a gentle rotation, but a violent, furious whirling, faster and faster. Its cups a blur against the gray, oppressive sky. It emitted a high-pitched, metallic shriek, a sound of metal tortured beyond its limits. Yet, not a breath of wind stirred around the station. The flags hung limp. The snow fell in straight, lazy drifts. The anemometer spins violently with no wind. Do not go outside. My scientific training warred with a primal instinct to flee. The instrument was clearly malfunctioning, perhaps iced over, its bearings shot. My duty was to maintain the equipment. I reached for my heavy-duty parka, the urge to go out, to fix it, to impose some semblance of rational order on this madness, almost overwhelming. Blackwood's warning, stark and absolute, echoed in my mind. I hesitated at the reinforced outer door, my hand on the latch. Through the small, triple-glazed porthole, I could see nothing but the swirling snow and the crazily spinning anemometer. But I felt it. An immense, unseen pressure outside, a silent, predatory waiting. It was as if the mountain itself were holding its breath, daring me to step out into its invisible, lethal embrace. I snatched my hand back from the latch as if burned, retreating deeper into the station. The shriek of the phantom wind-driven anemometer, a mocking laugh at my expense, driven by a desperate need for distraction, for any kind of human connection. However tenuous, I searched Blackwood's quarters more thoroughly, tucked beneath a loose floorboard under his bunk where I'd previously found only dust and forgotten ration wrappers. My fingers brushed against something else, a slim, water-stained notebook. It wasn't Blackwood's neat, spidery script. This handwriting was feminine, looping, increasingly frantic. The name on the inside cover, Eliza Winters. Missing hiker. Last seen 2 years ago, near the summit. Her entries began with the usual awe of any adventurer tackling Mount Washington, but they quickly spiraled into fear and paranoia. She wrote of strange encounters with the oddly intense station master, Blackwood, of unsettling sounds at night, sounds she couldn't identify, of feeling watched, of Blackwood's growing obsession with the mountain's true voice and the colors of the deep ice. Her last few entries were fragmented, terrified. He knows I heard him, talking to it. The wind whispers my name now. He says the red offering is almost ready. And then, scrawled across the final page, a crude, shaky drawing. A stick figure lying in it, the snow, surrounded by what looked like pulsating red tendrils. Beneath it, 2 words, "It lives." The blizzard finally broke, leaving behind a world sculpted in pristine, blinding white, and a silence so profound it felt like the mountain was still holding its breath after its furious outburst. I was exhausted, physically and mentally frayed. The lines between reality and the station's insidious whispers blurring with each passing hour. Eliza Winters' journal rested on my small desk, a chilling testament to a fate I was increasingly terrified I might share. That morning, as the first weak rays of a reluctant sun pierced the lingering cloud cover, I looked out the main observation window and stopped dead. My blood, already chilled from a sleepless night, turned to ice, spread across a wide swathe of the freshly fallen snow directly in front of the station's main entrance, like a grotesque Pollock painting, were patches of red. Not a faint tint, not a subtle discoloration. This was a deep, visceral crimson, stark and obscene against the pure white. It looked like gallons of blood had been spilled and flash frozen. Dawn shoveled the red snow, It pulses. Blackwood's final, most bizarre rule. My scientific mind scrabbled for an explanation. Minerals leached from the rock. Some kind of airborne algae? But Eliza's words echoed. Eliza's words echoed. It lives. And as I stared, transfixed through the reinforced glass, I could swear I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible throb within the largest patch of crimson snow. A slow, rhythmic pulsation, like a sleeping, monstrous heart. Disregarding the cold that bit at me, I grabbed my high-resolution camera, a relic from a past life, when Laura and I had chased auroras and alpine sunsets. Not phantoms. I wouldn't touch it, wouldn't go near it, but I had to document. From the relative safety of the station's slightly ajar doorway, I took several photographs, the telephoto lens bringing the unnerving spectacle into sharp, disturbing focus. My next radio call to Dr. Chen was strained. I described the red snow, trying to keep my voice level, scientific. It's anomalous, Sarah, deeply pigmented, and it appears to exhibit a subtle rhythmic undulation. There was a long pause on the other end, filled only with static. Danielle, she finally said, her voice carefully neutral. Are you feeling all right? The isolation? It can affect perception. There are no geological reports of such phenomena on Washington. Perhaps it's an optical illusion. Some reflection from the new snow. She promised to check with geologists about rare mineral deposits, but advised me sternly not to approach or disturb the discoloration under any circumstances until help could be dispatched, which given the post-blizzard conditions might still be days away. Her skepticism was a cold comfort. Later that day, I returned to Blackwood's journal searching for any mention of this red snow. The later entries were increasingly unhinged, filled with a chilling blend of scientific jargon and cult-like devotion. He wrote of feeding the ancient song, of the sanguine communion, of the mountain's blood awakening, and then a passage that made my stomach churn. The color is the key. The life essence drawn from the unwary, amplified by the peak's unique resonance. It calls to the deepness. It nourishes what slumbers. Eliza Vos, a promising conductor, but her frequency was ultimately incompatible. A new vessel is required for the true awakening. A new vessel. My blood ran cold. That evening, as dusk began to bleed across the gray sky, I reviewed the photographs of the red snow on my laptop. I zoomed in on one of the larger patches, the details startlingly clear. My breath caught in my throat. The crimson particles weren't random crystalline structures. They were something else. They seemed to form intricate, almost calligraphic patterns. Alien, and yet disturbingly, vaguely familiar, like symbols I'd seen in Blackwood's most fevered journal entries. And there, at the very center of one of the pulsating crimson patches, almost indistinguishable from the gore-like slush, unless one looked very, very closely, was a shape, a dark, vaguely humanoid outline, half submerged, as if something were slowly, deliberately trying to claw its way out from beneath the blood-red shroud. Or perhaps something was being formed by it. The fragile dam of Daniel Hayes' carefully constructed sanity was crumbling, eroded by the relentless siege of isolation, the insidious whispers in the wind, and the pulsing, unthinkable reality of the crimson snow. Sleep had become a gallery of horrors, each night showcasing a new, more grotesque tableau. Laura, her eyes empty pits, beckoning him from beneath a shroud of blood-red ice. Victor Blackwood, a cadaverous puppet master, conducting an orchestra of screaming winds with skeletal fingers. Eliza Winters, a frozen statue, her lips silently forming his name. The south-facing window, overlooking the jagged moor of Devil's Gullet, exerted a stronger pull with each passing hour, the abyss seeming to hum with a promise of final icy oblivion. A siren song for his guilt-ravaged soul. The whispers were no longer mere suggestions, fleeting phantoms at the edge of hearing. They were insidious, articulate, weaving themselves into the very fabric of his thoughts, using Laura's voice with a puppeteer's cruel precision. "Danny, my love, the ice is not so cold once you embrace it. I found peace here." Blackwood understood. "He's waiting to guide you. We can be together, away from the pain." He found himself answering, his voice a raw tear in the oppressive silence of the station, sometimes pleading, sometimes raging against the spectral promises. He knew, on a dwindling island of rationality, that this was a descent into madness, but the mountain's cocktail of profound grief, crushing guilt, and the sheer unholy weight of solitude was proving too potent, too irresistible to his fractured will. The rules, once seen as the eccentricities of a disturbed mind, now felt like lifelines he was deliberately, perversely severing. He stood shivering by a purposefully unlatched door during the height of a windstorm, his head tilted, straining to decipher the ancient, almost intelligible lexicon of the gale, desperate for a clear word from Laura, a sign, a crumb of solace, however illusory. Petty story. The anemometer, that malevolent spinner, would often erupt into its furious, windless dance, a clear herald of an unseen, encroaching power. And instead of retreating to the station's core, Daniel would find himself drawn to the reinforced windows, staring out into the oppressive, featureless gray, a terrible fascination warring with his primal fear. What monstrous ballet was being performed just beyond his sight? What silent invitation was being offered? His final descent into the mountain's madness was precipitated by a chilling discovery, an answer to a question he hadn't dared to fully form. Eliza Winter's journal, that testament to a terror he now intimately understood, contained a fragmented map, a desperate scrawl. "He goes below, where the ice breathes. Stone steps, old shed marked auxiliary storage. Sacrifices for the old song," said the mountain demands its chorus. The auxiliary storage shed, a dilapidated lean-to structural connected to the main station by a rickety, snow-drifted walkway, was a place Daniel had previously dismissed as containing nothing but broken equipment and mouse droppings. Now, armed with Eliza's dying words, he returned, a cold premonition coiling in his gut. Beneath a pile of weather-beaten tarpaulins and discarded meteorological instruments, he found it. A heavy, frost-rimmed steel hatch, bolted shut not from the inside, but from the outside. The bolts ancient and deeply rusted. It took every ounce of his remaining strength, and a salvaged crowbar from Blackwood's scattered tools, to wrench it open. A blast of frigid, footed air, thick with the cloying scent of damp earth, metallic decay, and something sickeningly organic, like long-rotted meat, rushed up to meet him, nearly making him gag. Steep, crudely hewn stone steps, slick with verdigris and ice, spiraled down into the lightless heart of Mount Washington. His heavy-duty flashlight, its beam seeming pathetically inadequate against the oppressive Stygian gloom, cut a shaky swath through the darkness. The steps led into a vast natural ice cave, its walls shimmering with trapped ancient light. But the natural beauty was horribly defiled. The cave had been adapted, expanded, shaped by human tools, and for human, or perhaps inhuman, purpose. What he saw there extinguished the last embers of his scientific detachment, plunging him into a purely visceral horror. The ice walls were a canvas of madness, covered in Victor Blackwood's obsessive, spidery script, a nightmarish blend of meteorological symbols, arcane geometries, and what Daniel recognized with a jolt as perversions of ancient Native American pictograms. These were interspersed with tally marks, hundreds of them, arranged in unsettling, ritualistic patterns. At the far end of the cavern, on a rough, elevated platform of rock and darker, veined ice that resembled a sacrificial altar, lay obscene collection of artifacts. Brittle animal bones picked clean, tarnished silver instruments of a purpose he couldn't fathom, resembling surgical tools from a madman's dream, and scattered amongst them, like offerings to a forgotten, bloodthirsty god, were heartbreakingly mundane items of clothing. A child's single, brightly colored mitten, a man's sturdy, worn hiking boot, its laces still tied, a woman's faded red woolen scarf, identical to one Laura had owned, a pair of delicate, shattered eyeglasses, Eliza's, and undoubtedly countless others. Beneath the altar, a vast, dark, viscous stain had seeped deep into the porous ice floor, a permanent record of unspeakable rites. This was no mere weather station. It was a charnel house, then tucked into a carefully carved niche near the altar. Protected from the dripping ice, he found them, the final volumes of Blackwood's journals. These were not the writings of a lonely scientist succumbing to cabin fever. These were the meticulous, exultant records of a high priest, a willing servant of a malevolent power. Blackwood, it became terrifyingly clear, hadn't just been observing the mountain. He had been communing with it, feeding it. He believed the mountain entity, an ancient, elemental consciousness of unimaginable power and hunger, demanded tribute, not just fear, though that was a savory appetizer, but life force, blood, the very essence of sacrificed lives, to maintain its slumbering power, or perhaps to grant Blackwood its dark boons. Forbidden knowledge of the Earth's deepest secrets, a twisted form of control over its savage weather, perhaps even the insidious promise of an unnatural, icy immortality. The crimson snow wasn't a random geological anomaly. It was a gruesome, effervescent byproduct of these feedings, a sacrament of slaughter. Eliza Winters, and an untold number of missing hikers and weather casualties before her, hadn't just been unfortunate victims of the mountain's harshness. They had been carefully selected, perhaps even lured, for Blackwood's ghastly observances. And Victor Blackwood hadn't simply vanished into a whiteout. According to his final, ecstatic, almost orgasmic entries, he had ascended. He was preparing to shed this mortal coil and fully merge with the mountain's eternal song, to become its new voice, its undying herald, its gatekeeper. He was waiting for a worthy successor, someone with the right kind of receptive emptiness, someone already touched by profound grief and loss, to continue the sacred rites when the mountain next awoke fully. He was waiting. Daniel realized with a wave of nauseating terror that nearly buckled his knees for him. As this horrifying understanding crashed down, the very ice around Daniel began to thrum, a low, powerful subsonic vibration that resonated deep within his chest, shaking his bones, making his teeth ache. The whispers started again, no longer just in the wind outside, or at the edge of his hearing, but all around him, inside his skull. A deafening, multi-layered chorus of voices, Laura's sweet tones, Eliza's terrified whimpers, Blackwood's commanding baritone, and countless, unidentifiable others, a legion of lost souls, all merging into a single, overwhelming, seductive command. Join the song. Feed the ancient ice. Become what we have become. Become eternal. The crimson snow outside. The crimson snow outside. The main station, Daniel now understood with absolute, mind-shattering certainty, was not just a stain. It was a lure, a beacon, a living tapestry woven from the stolen lives that had nourished the mountain and the very ground beneath his feet. This frozen, indifferent peak. It wasn't just rock and ancient ice. It was alive. It was aware. And it was ravenously, insatiably hungry. A deep, guttural roar. a sound that was simultaneously geological, like the grinding of tectonic plates, and terrifyingly, unmistakably organic, like the bellow of some colossal, primal beast, echoed from deeper within the labyrinthine ice cave. Sustain, his flashlight already flickering erratically, died with a final pathetic pop, plunging him into an absolute, terrifying darkness. The chorus of whispers reached a deafening crescendo, the thrumming in his chest becoming a violent, agonizing pressure, pounding in time with what he recognized as the final, desperate beats of his own terrified heart, a rhythm beckoning him towards an unthinkable surrender. The mountain entity was no longer content with subtle whispers and cryptic rules. It was fully awake, and it was demanding its due, and Victor Blackwood, in some horrifying, transfigured, perhaps even incorporeal state, was its conductor, its gleeful usher. He manifested then, not as a man of flesh and blood, but as a towering, vaguely humanoid silhouette composed of swirling, blizzard-force snow and pulsing, blood-red ice, materializing at the narrow mouth of the cave, blocking Daniel's only path to what little remained of his sanity. Its voice, a booming, harmonious echo layered within the wind itself, filled the cavern. "Welcome home, Daniel Hayes. The song is finally ready for a new, strong voice. Laura is waiting to harmonize with you forever. Miss Signors, and I'll read him. Unkindisch ignorante, Pedronornestein, Abyss." The monstrous effigy of Victor Blackwood, a swirling vortex of crimson-laced ice and shrieking wind, loomed in the cave mouth, its form shifting, coalescing, its voice a symphony of predation and perverse, welcoming warmth. It was an abomination, a terrifying fusion of man and mountain, a testament to a devotion that had crossed the threshold into utter damnation. "You resisted the whispers for so long, Daniel." The Blackwood thing boomed, the sound seeming to emanate from the very ice around them, reverberating deep within Daniel's skull. "But the silence within your grief, it always called to us. Laura's pretty, tragic silence. Such beautiful, receptive silence. She paved the way for you. That name, Laura, spoken with such defining intimacy by this unthing that had stolen the guise of a scientist. It was a sacrilege, a blasphemy against her memory that pierced through Daniel's shock-induced paralysis, igniting a core of cold, diamond-hard fury. The pristine image of her laughter, her warmth, her vibrant life. It was a desperate, flickering candle against the overwhelming, consuming darkness of the mountain. But it was his, and he would not let this abomination tarnish it further. "She's beyond your reach, you monster," Daniel roared, his voice raw, surprisingly steady, adrenaline afire in his veins. "And so am I. You and your mountain can feast on your own damned echoes." He had no conventional weapon, no means to fight this supernatural horror. But he had Blackwood's own sacrilegious scriptures, the meticulously detailed journals of his descent into madness and communion. He remembered the obsessive notes on focal resonance points, harmonic disruption frequencies, and thermal energy conduction within the primary ice fissure, and he remembered, with a flash of desperate inspiration, the layout of the now precarious weather station above, its arrays of sensitive, high-powered meteorological equipment, its emergency backup systems. The Blackwood entity laughed, a sound like 1,000 tons of ice grinding and shattering. "Ambition, Hayes. This isn't ambition. It is glorious, eternal communion. True immortality within the mountain's heart. Join us, Daniel, and you will truly understand. You will hear Laura sing to you again, her voice clear and strong, forever weaving through the heart of every storm, every perfect winter." Brutal, icy tendrils shot through with the pulsing, sickening crimson of the cursed snow, began to snake from the cave walls, from the floor, from the very air, reaching for him, constricting his path. Daniel scrambled backwards, deeper into the small makeshift antechamber, where Blackwood had hoarded his final, most damning records. His eyes, now accustomed to the faint, internal luminescence of the corrupted ice, darted around, seeking anything, any tool, any desperate advantage. His gaze fell upon a heavy, conspicuously new-looking metal container stashed behind a stack of older, more mundane emergency supplies. It was labeled Magnesium Flares, Extreme High Intensity. Do not use in confined spaces. Standard, if rarely needed, emergency equipment for Arctic conditions. And beside it, open to a heavily annotated page, was one of Blackwood's earlier, more conventionally scientific notebooks, detailing the station's emergency power routing and the exact location of a major electrical conduit that ran alarmingly close to the unstable ice fissure directly beneath this part of the cavern. An idea, insane, desperate, suicidal perhaps, yet possessed of a terrible, beautiful logic sparked in Daniel's ravaged mind. If the entity and its hideous herald Blackwood communicated through sound, through resonance, through the very geological and energetic structure of the mountain and the station, then perhaps a sufficiently violent disruption, dodging a grasping, razor sharp crimson tendril that hissed as it narrowly missed his face. Daniel lunged for the container of flares. Blackwood's monstrous, storm-wrought form advanced, its sheer bulk filling the narrow passage, its icy, suffocating aura pressing in on him. There is no escape from the mountain's embrace, Daniel, it boomed. Only union, a beautiful, final assimilation. This sacred union is hereby annulled, you goddamned ice-veined son of a bitch. Daniel screamed, his voice cracking, but filled with a desperate, defiant resolve. He fumbled with the latches on the flare container, his frozen fingers clumsy. He managed to wrench two of the largest flares free. Blackwood's form was almost upon him, the stench of freezer burn and something else, something that smelled like an ancient, charnel sweetness, overwhelming. This is for Laura, for Eliza, for all the others you fed to your frozen god, Daniel cried, striking the flares against the rough ice wall. They ignited with a sudden, violent, almost explosive roar, instantly filling the confined ice cave with a blinding, searing magnesium glare and an acrid, choking cloud of white smoke. The heat was instantaneous, intense, almost unbearable after the deep, penetrating cold. The effect on the Blackwood entity, and by extension the thrumming cavern, was immediate and cataclysmic. It recoiled with a shriek that was no longer human, no longer wind, but something purely elemental, a sound of matter itself being torn apart, a sound of immense, agonizing pressure and unimaginable pain. The obsidian-hard, crimson-laced ice that formed its shifting, monstrous body began to crack, to hiss, to sublimate directly into superheated steam. The terrifying thrumming in the cave faltered, then spiked into a discordant, shrieking feedback loop. The chorus of seductive whispers dissolved into a pandemonium of panicked, fragmented shrieks, as if 1,000 trapped souls were suddenly, violently, released from their icy torment. Warmth, light, sound, intense, chaotic, overwhelming. The absolute antithesis of the entity's cold, dark, silent domain, and the sudden violent application of intense thermal energy directly onto the delicate, supercooled structure of the ancient ice fissure. Daniel didn't wait to witness the full extent of the cataclysm he had unleashed. He scrambled back up the treacherous stone steps, his lungs burning from the acrid magnesium smoke. The death shrieks of the wounded, perhaps dying, entity and its shattered herald echoing behind him, a sound that would haunt his nightmares for the forwarding rest of his days. As he burst, choking and half-blinded, out of the hatch and into the relative, though rapidly deteriorating, sanity of the storage shed. He heard it. A deep, groaning, protracted rumble from the very bowels of Mount Washington. A sound of immense, subterranean shifting. Of ancient ice giving way under unimaginable stress. The ground beneath the entire weather station shuddered violently. He stumbled blindly back into the main observatory, his lungs on fire, his vision blurred by smoke and tears. The radio, he had to warn Sarah. Had to tell someone, anyone before. The mountain groaned again, a deafening, earth-shattering tremor that threw him bodily to his knees. Meteorological equipment, bolted down for decades, toppled from shelves, smashing into pieces. Cracks, wide as his fist, spiderwebbed across the reinforced windows. The view outside now, a terrifying panorama of roiling black clouds and shifting, unstable rock faces. Through one of the fractured panes, he saw a vast, angry plume of black smoke and superheated steam erupting from a newly omened outbreak from fissure near the abyss of Devil's Gullet. The very foundation of the station was visibly, terrifyingly coming apart. He clawed his way to the radio console, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the microphone. Sarah, damn it, can you hear me?" he rapped. "Blackwood. Hey, the mountain. It's alive. The flares in the ice cave. I think I broke something. Something terrible is." His voice was lost in a fresh, deafening wave of tearing static and another violent, bone-jarring lurch of the building. The lights flickered, sizzled, and died. The last thing Daniel saw, before the floor plates buckled and the world disintegrated into a maelstrom of screaming wind, tearing metal, and an avalanche of ice and snow, was the heavy steel anemometer mast outside, no longer spinning, grotesquely bent, then snapped clean off its moorings, cartwheeling silently into the white, indifferent abyss. The first sensation to pierce the suffocating, snow-filled darkness was an agonizing, bone-deep cold, so profound it felt as if his very marrow were crystallizing into ice. Then, a muffled cacophony. Distant, distorted shouts, the whining growl of machinery, the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of helicopter blades struggling against a hostile wind. Daniel Hayes drifted in and out of a shocked, hypothermic, pain-racked haze. He remembered the blinding heat of the flares, the mountain's retaliatory roar, the station tearing itself apart around him, and then falling, a sickening, endless, weightless tumble into a white, roaring oblivion. It should have been the end, when he finally, groggily, forced his swollen eyelids open to a blurry, sterile, impossibly bright white. It wasn't the interior of the doomed weather station. It was the sterile, beeping interior of a modern hospital room. Dr. Zara Chen, her face a mask of grim exhaustion, etched with lines of worry that hadn't been there weeks before, sat slumped in a chair beside his bed. "Daniel," she breathed, her voice husky, relief and a profound weariness warring in her eyes. "Dear God, Daniel, we honestly thought we'd lost you for good this time." Piecing together the fractured narrative of what had happened took days, even weeks, as Daniel recovered from severe hypothermia, a serious concussion, multiple compound fractures, and lungs scarred by magnesium smoke inhalation. After his last broken, almost incoherent transmission, followed almost immediately by seismic sensors across New England, registering a significant, highly localized and anomalous tremor originating directly from the summit of Mount Washington. Sarah Shan had, against astronomical odds, impossible weather conditions, and considerable bureaucratic inertia, bullied, cajoled, and finally convinced the authorities to dispatch an elite, high-altitude search and rescue team during the briefest, Most U teamed during the briefest, treacherous of weather windows. They had found the Mount Washington Observatory, or what little remained of it, catastrophically damaged, virtually obliterated. A vast section of the summit, where the station had stood for nearly a century, had collapsed into a newly formed, steaming, unstable chasm directly above Devil's Gullet. The rescue team, risking their own lives amidst shifting ice and treacherous rockfalls, had found Daniel, more dead than alive, miraculously thrown clear of the main wreckage, half buried in a deep snowdrift some distance from the epicenter of the collapse. He was alive by a sheer, inexplicable miracle, or perhaps, as one grizzled rescuer later muttered, because the mountain decided to spit him back out. Of senior meteorologist Victor Blackwood, there was, of course, no trace. The official report, released after a cursory and carefully managed investigation, cited the unprecedented and unpredictable geological event, likely a localized cryoseismic incident exacerbated by extreme barometric pressure changes, as the cause of the station's tragic destruction and Mr. Blackwood's presumed heroic death while attempting to secure vital data. Daniel's fragmented, often delirious, initial accounts of whispering winds from sentient entities, of ancient rituals, of crimson, pulsing snow, and of a monstrous ice-formed figure of his predecessor, were predictably, perhaps mercifully, attributed to altitude sickness, prolonged isolation-induced stress, oxygen deprivation, and severe trauma-induced psychosis. The scoured floor of the station, the hidden ice cave, Eliza Winter's damning journal, Blackwood's most heretical writings, all conveniently, permanently swallowed by the newly formed chasm, or buried under tens of thousands of tons of fresh snow, solidifying ice, and shattered rock. The case of the missing, and now presumed deceased, station master was neatly, officially, and permanently sealed. Daniel recovered, physically at least, after months of painful rehabilitation. The nightmares, however, became his constant, unwelcome companions. Nightly replays of fire and ice, of Laura falling endlessly, of Blackwood's transfigured, glaring face, of the mountain's hungry, whispering roar. He could still hear those insidious whispers in every strong gust of wind. See fleeting, impossible crimson stains in every patch of melting winter snow. Feel the phantom thrumming of the ice cave deep within his bones. He tried once to tell his full story to a sympathetic, but ultimately skeptical psychiatrist. The polite nods, the pitying glances, the gentle suggestions of medication were, in their own way, more invalidating, more isolating than outright disbelief would have been. He was, the world had decided, the man who had simply cracked under the unimaginable pressure, the sole survivor whose tormented mind had fractured in the infamous home of the world's worst weather. He learned to keep his own counsel, to lock the true horrors away in the icy caverns of his own memory. Months later, living a quiet, deliberately unremarkable life in a small, nondescript coastal town, far from any mountain range that might stir those frozen echoes, he received an anonymous, unmarked package through the mail. Dr. Shen's doing, he suspected. She had always possessed a streak of quiet rebellion beneath her professional veneer. Inside, there was no note of explanation, no comforting words, just a secure digital audio recorder and a high-density, encrypted data chip. The recorder contained the final, raw, unedited audio transmissions from the doomed Mount Washington station. His own desperate, increasingly incoherent calls for help, but also, when filtered and amplified, horrifyingly interspersed with the ever-present, shrieking static, other distinct, chilling sounds. Faint, multi-layered, sibilant whispers in a language that still danced just at the edge of his comprehension. A low, powerful, subsonic thrumming that precisely matched the resonance he'd felt in the ice cave. And then, most terrifyingly of all, a crystal-clear, concise voice recording, evidently captured just moments before the final catastrophic collapse, almost certainly from one of the station's robust external environmental microphones that had, by some fluke, continued transmitting for a short, vital while after the main communication array had failed. It was the synthesized, yet unmistakably recognizable, voice of Victor Blackwood, no longer distorted by wind or demonic possession, no longer booming with borrowed power, but chillingly calm, almost disappointingly mundane, yet interwoven with the unmistakable sound of what could only be described as a vast, ancient, sighing exhalation, like the mountain itself taking a final, satisfied breath. The offering was ultimately insufficient to complete the full transference. Blackwood's voice stated, a note of cold, almost pedantic disappointment in its metallic tone. But the new primary resonance, it has been clearly felt. The cycle inevitably thins with such disruption, but it will always return. The peak eternally calls for, and will always find its true voice. Always. Then, a soft final click, and an endless, profound silence. The accompanying data chip contained the final, unexpurgated telemetry logs from the station's magnetometers, atmospheric pressure sensors, and seismic recording devices. There was indeed concrete, irrefutable scientific data detailing a massive, highly anomalous energy spike, a localized magnetic field distortion of incredible magnitude, and a series of sharp, subterranean tremors originating directly beneath the observatory, all coinciding exactly to the microsecond with Daniel's own fragmented, disbelieved description of the moment he had ignited the magnesium flares deep within the sacrificial ice cave. Sarah Chen had offered him no interpretation, no words of belief or disbelief, no comfort. She had simply sent him the unvarnished, terrifying data, proof, or perhaps just fresh kindling for a new, more informed kind of madness. Daniel looked out of his apartment window at the mundane, unremarkable cityscape, bathed in the gentle light of a spring afternoon. A warm breeze picked up from the nearby ocean, rustling the new leaves of a young maple tree planted on the sidewalk below. And for one moment, just a fleeting, heart-stopping, ice-cold moment, he could have sworn he heard it, impossibly faint, yet achingly, terrifyingly familiar, carried on that gentle, urban zephyr, a single, guttural word in a language he almost understood, and the faintest, coldest, most unwelcome echo of a name he knew he would never, ever forget, no matter how far he ran. Laura, the ancient hungry mountain, hadn't finished singing its terrible, seductive song. It was merely biding its time, gathering its strength, waiting patiently for the next inevitable storm, the next unwitting listener, the next empty, grieving soul to serve as its willing or unwilling vessel. And its insidious frozen echoes, Daniel Hayes knew with a certainty that chilled him more profoundly than any Alaskan blizzard or Washington peak ever could, were now a permanent, unwelcome, whispering resident within the fractured, haunted silence of his own irrevocably changed soul. The mountain remembers. Daniel Hayes learned that some storms leave scars far deeper than frostbite. The rules were meant to shield, but the true horror was always waiting beneath the ice. The entity may be wounded, but its hunger is eternal. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the final chilling transmission, the twist that reveals the true, ongoing cost of surviving Mount Washington. The data doesn't lie. What do you think the mountain entity truly is? What was Blackwood's ultimate fate? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it through the night on the summit, if the mountain hasn't claimed you, then you're already part of our story. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because some places, they never truly let you go. And the wind, it still whispers.